I don't think there are many families in this parish that haven't had to face grief and bereavement in the past 12 months. Within my own family, I lost a much-loved nephew to the illness in his young years, to the illness of alcoholism. My sister, his mother, is still reeling under the loss. All colour has drained from her everyday life, because grief is like that. Grief is one of the sharpest, painful wounds that we humans experience. And yet, on the other hand, it's also clear testimony of the great love that we had for those who have gone before us. Anyone who frequents this church will know that that's a particular ministry here that happens all too frequently. Sometimes in this church we have 3 and 4 funerals a week. We acknowledge the great work of our parish team, and also Chris, who was helping with the reading of those names, her work in preparing families to celebrate the final Eucharist of their loved ones. It's a valuable and vital ministry. But the grief is sometimes very hard to solve or to help with, because people are so grieved and so hurt and so racked with pain. There's a great poet who wrote these words, W.H. Auden. In his poem Funeral Blues, he wrote these words to try and express what it's like to be in grief. He wrote, "When we grieve, all the lights go out. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one of them. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the woods, for nothing now can ever come to any good." That's often expressed as something of what it feels like when we are gripped with grief and sadness. Not every day, thank goodness, but when it comes to visit, it can come with a vengeance. And yet, if we're willing to love someone deeply, then we risk this pain, because bereavement is love pain. It's the love that is disrupted now and has changed, but as Christians, not ended, but it has changed. We don't see them. We can't relate to them in the same way. But it is a testimony of our deep, deep connections with others. Some years ago, I heard of an Anglican priest whose wife became seriously ill, and he vowed to be with her to the very end. He never took a break or a holiday, because he was committed to be with her to the very end. Towards the last year, she had to go into hospice. And every day he had a particular ritual. He used to go to his little church and he would say a few prayers, and then on his way to the hospice, he would stop at a florist to get flowers. And then he would spend the rest of the time with his wife. One day he did that. He went to his chapel, his church. He said his prayers. He went and got some flowers. And then he went to the hospice, only to be told that he was too late. She had passed. His years of vigil seemed to be of no avail. He quietly picked up the flowers, left the hospice, and he went to his church. And there was people in the church at the time, and this is what they saw. He walked up the aisle to the altar of the church, and he flung the flowers at the foot of the altar. and with a painful rage, he shouted the words, "Why?" The people who were with him thought he had lost his faith. He hadn't. He hadn't lost his faith. He brought his raw emotions in prayer before the Lord in the only way he could. That was the only word that could come out of his lips. Why? Why then? Why now? But you know, every Sunday at Mass we read the Psalms, and the Psalms are also prayers of ordinary people like him who tried to find expression for those deepest emotions that often surface in grief. For example, one of the Psalms that reads, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you? Why are you so far from saving me? Why are you so far from the words of my groaning? O God, I cry by day and you do not answer, and by night and I find no rest. These are faithful words. These are not words of despair. They sound it, but they're prayerful, anguished prayers. They come from the deepest part of the human being. They're raw. And in them we're searching for meaning and for a safe harbour from the awfulness of what our loss has brought. But let's be clear. There is no map for dealing with loss. There's no established itinerary. There's no universal checklist where every item ticked off gets us closer to success. We cannot succeed in mourning our loved ones, but we also cannot fail. Grief is not a sickness like the flu, although we never fully get over it. We can come to a point where we begin to come to terms with it. It's not a process to be rushed, but a human process that must be allowed to happen over time and in its own time. Eventually, we may encounter the grace that makes sense of the words, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Sorrow is woven into the very texture of life. Pains and disappointments, depressions, illness and bereavement, they're all a part of our everyday existence, and that list could go on. Is there any meaning to this inescapable mingling in our life of sorrow and joy? The mystics say there is. If tears are a fact of life, they have several lessons to teach us. And the first one is to keep an even keel through life's inevitable storms. They teach us the truth that to lose a loved one is to be called to terms with that loss, to face it, or to risk losing touch with that within us that was able to love in the first place. It's love pain, they tell us. Grief also pushes away all the worries and concerns that beguile us every day and bring us to the core thing of love and relationship. It calls us, in a way, back to life and to engagement, to realize that we are called to hopeful grief, not despairing grief, but to hopeful grief that bids us to continue the journey in the expectation of a good that is yet to be. Finally, not only are we people who have experienced grief and loss, we are people who accompany others on that journey, our relatives and our friends. There are a few things that we should do and a few things that we shouldn't do when with people who are grieving. We should be a good listener. We should respect the person's unique, personal way of grieving. We should acknowledge and accept that there will be mood swings, all in the one day. We should avoid giving advice. We should refrain from trying to explain their loss away in simple terms. We should help with the practical tasks. We should stay connected with them when they push us away and available. And we should offer words that touch the heart. And when invited to do so, quite like what we're doing this evening, we should pray with them and for them, those who grieve, so that one day they can truly proclaim with all sincerity, "Blessed are those who mourn, for truly they have been comforted." Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May their souls and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace.